Da dee da dee da dee da dee da da. I da dee da da dee da and da dee da dee da. Good morning, everybody. We are continuing our learning the laws of washing our hands, and we are on chapter 40 in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We are on chapter 7. Paragraph 7, chapter 40. Let's say this happens quite regularly. You're all set. You want to start your meal, excited, and you don't have anything to wash your hands with. What do? So he's assuming for the beginning here is he doesn't have a vessel to wash, and also he doesn't have maybe running water in his house. But not so clear. It's not so simple, the running water in your house. We'll show you. Okay. So he's going to say, go, you can put your hands in a river and wash your hands that way. Or you could put it in a mikveh. That would be good enough for a woman's immersion. Or put it in a spring. Even if it doesn't have 40 seah. 40 seah is the minimum volume of water that a mikveh needs, but a spring would work here. Especially you're out camping. This one could be useful. Right, you can't, by the way, 40 seah is about 200 gallons. You can't mikveh in a spring unless there's a mayan, there's a pool, a mikveh of water that has enough of but if it's just flowing, you can put your hands in it. Rak has to be enough. As long as there's enough water running, that when you put your hands in it, it covers them all at the same time. You also say al Netilat Yadayim, same bracha b'shasa dechak. Let's say there's no water available. You could even put your hands in snow. If you got a lot of snow on the ground. So that can work during certain times of the year in certain places. Mikveh, right? So if you're in a place where there's a lot of snow on the ground, just go out, put them in. Let's say you have to use a pump. We'll explain what that is. So the pump, okay, is right. So back in the day, some wells were just dug very deep, right? And then they'd stick, like really old school, right? They'd put a bucket down there. But most pumps, by the 19th century, the way the pumps is the most wells where they would dig a well and then they would put a pumping mechanism attached to a long pole, a long pipe, and you would pump. Everybody's seen it, right? You pump the water, and it would direct the stream of water from this underground water. And the pump is not considered a vessel because it doesn't actually hold the water, right? It just moves the water along. And therefore, even though it's a great source of water, it's not qualified as a vessel for Netilat Yadayim. So you probably see where we're going with this, right? If your hand is completely covered by the flow of the pump water and the water is directly connected to the water in the spring, it's like he or she put her hands in the spring, which would be valid. However, you really have to know the pump mechanism in this case to ascertain if it's appropriate. And so it's a little beyond the scope of our learning, but also most people don't, they're not looking to find out, well, how is this pump made? And we come across pumps so rarely. But the pump is going to be our clue on how we're going to deal with water from a faucet as well. But so now back to the original text. Okay. Oh, by the way, you don't have to put both hands into the running into the spring at the same time, just enough for one hand at a time. Okay, back to the text. Let's say you have to use a pump. You should place one hand near the ground. With the second hand, you should so you draw the pump water. You switch. Or maybe you've got a friend there who can pump the water, and then you can have both hands close to the ground. But if the hands are too high off the ground, when you're doing this pump action washing, then it doesn't count as Netilat Yadayim, and you have to do it again. So ritual immersion of the hands, because we're treating this pumped water like it's a continuation of the spring, so it needs to be right on the ground. Okay. So your hands need to be so if you're doing it to be like spring. Now, most people today, the big question is, you're at some function, you need to wash your hands, and all there is a faucet. So what are you going to do then? So the truth is you really want to get a paper cup or something like that, because it doesn't work to turn on and off the faucet, because the faucet is not a keli. It's not a keli. It's not a vessel, and it's critical that we wash our hands from a vessel. Even if you can only find a cup that holds 3 or 4 ounces, right? 3 or 4 ounces of water, small. That's going to be sufficient, or a jar, or we can really get creative, and it can be disposable. It doesn't have to be anything, of any value. Just has to be able to have that kind of ability to hold enough water and stand on its own, right? Couldn't be like half of a basketball. Okay, number 8. Let's say you've got water and it's become discolored for some reason. Something fell into it. Maybe the way it was stored, maybe something fell in it. Psuli. So if it's discolored water, we're not supposed to use it for Netilat Yadayim. However, let's say nothing fell into it, or it didn't discolor because it absorbed a color from the vessel it was stored in. Rather, that's just the color of the water in the place where you are. Then ksherim, it's good for Netilat Yadayim. Maim shenase behem malacha. Let's say you have water that was used to do some kind of work.
Like muddy water.
Muddy water. Okay, so if the water comes up muddy, yes, right? If you live in a place which doesn't have great, water filtration system, and the water comes out, silty, okay. Or even if you're, let's say, and this, you're at the national park or the state park, and there's an old pump, and you're pumping the water, and it comes up as kind of sandy or kind of water. It's not like, from your through your faucet, or even better, right? Filter. If that's the natural state of the water that's coming up, you can use that water even though it's silty or a little muddied. However, you can't use muddy water, i.e., you can't find a pond of muddy water, like a pool of muddy water, like a little bit on the ground. You can't use that water. So we're talking about water that comes up, or that is just naturally has discoloration for it. But let's say, right, you're really concerned about the drought, which we all should be concerned about the drought in our water usage. And if you're watching and you're not from California, you're probably thinking, what the heck are they talking about? We have a terrible drought in California, but in New York, it's great. So use all the water you need. Okay, back to our text. Now, let's say you've got some water and you're really, and especially, by the way, this is why, remember, again, we have to go back and say, right, they used to pump the water and schlep it to the person's house. They didn't have a faucet. So now you've schlepped all this water and you want to, kind of use it for more than one thing. So you got some water that you're soaking, vegetables in. Can you use that water now to wash your hands with? Oh, it's just right. So, or let's say you use it for dishwater to rinse your dishes. Okay. Or you put a container filled with mashkin. Then let's say you got a really hot vessel and you wanted to cool it off. Let's not to cool it off in something else. Oh, shemadad behem midos. Or let's say you used it to do measurements. So, today we've got cups that have measurements and everything, but you're using the water for some other purpose, right? And now you want to use it to wash your hands. Gam ken psulin. You can't use it once you've used the water for another purpose. Even just to soak vegetables, you can't turn around now and use that for the purposes of Netilat Yadayim to wash for a meal. Even though it might look clean, halachically it's like wastewater. And the same would be if somebody's already washed their hands in that water, right? Doesn't work. Disqualified. Let's say you've got water that became nimasu, it became repulsive. For example, you have a dog, and the dog drank from the water. Now, you wouldn't drink that water most likely. Oh, chazir k'nemer. Let's say you've got a trough of water and an animal. He says a pig, chazir, but I mean probably if a cow or a horse drank from that trough, you're not going to drink from that water. So it's become repulsive to you for the purposes of really using. Mishum denasek shoifchin. It becomes like wastewater. And he says we should be concerned about that opinion. But the Mishnah Berurah says that if you're really out of luck and all you have is that water left over from the dog water or the trough water, you could use that water, the shastachak, right, in a pinch, as we say. Number 9, let's say you didn't wash your hands. And then you touch the water. The water does not necessarily become ritually impure because you touch the water with the impure hands. Somebody who leaves the bathroom, for example, he can draw water from the barrel with his hands, and then use that water to wash his hands. And the remainder of the water in the barrel, again, remember, it's old days, the water in the barrel, that water is still good for Netilat Yadayim. But if you washed your hands in the barrel, to clean them, even if you only dip your small finger in there to clean it off, you're going to make all the water in the barrel no good for because you did a malacha. Now, this is again unusual case, but especially if you're camping and let's say you've got some water that you've stored on site or something, or it can happen. I'm sure we could come up with cases. So as long as you scooped the water out, that water is no longer that water is okay to use. Number 10, maim meluchim, water that is salty, sruchim, or putrid, or marim, or bitter, or achurim. That's what you said before of muddied water. Again, this is muddied water like that's sitting, not that comes up from the pump with a little bit of silt in it. Im ein ruin l'shtiyus kelev, if it has been so, contaminated, we would say, because of these different elements, the salt or some kind of sulfur. You can have that sulfur smell in water sometimes. And you would bring this water to a dog, and the dog would be like, no, please, I'll take the Evian, no, thank you. Psulim, Tizdayim. If a dog won't drink from it, you can't use it for Netilat Yadayim. And the Kodim and Netila, so those are most of the cases. I'm sure that we could come up with other cases. Kodim Netilat Yadayim. So before you go and wash your hands, now, in addition to making sure you've got a good supply of water, and you have a vessel which is a vessel, right? It's considered a vessel. It can hold enough water. Your hands should be clean, right? This Netilat Yadayim is not to get the schmutz off. It's to purify them before we eat. So you have to be clean. You don't want anything stuck to the hands, because that would be a interposition that would get between the water and your skin. Okay. The laws of chatzitza are going to be discussed more in the next sif. Let's say you've got long fingernails. If you have to be careful that you have clean fingernails, right? That there's no schmutz under your fingernails, like dirt has collected on your fingernails, because that could be considered a chatzitza. Okay, mishum dehave chatzitza. You should take the rings off your fingers, so there won't be an interposition. Now, few things here. If you've got short fingernails, says the Mishnah Berurah, you don't need to check. If the ring is loose and water can get underneath it, it still should be removed. Okay. Even though, the laws of chatzitza are interesting, because even though a person who wears a ring all the time, let's say a wedding band or a decorative ring, and they don't consider it like they wear it all the time, there are going to be times that a woman or a guy who's wearing a ring will want to take off those things. So since they don't wear them always, it's considered something which could be a chatzitza, and we want to take it off, obviously in a safe place, when we wash our hands. But the Mishnah Berurah discusses the halacha of a man's ring, which I've gone through. And it seems to me you could come down on either side. On one side, you could say that most men who wear wedding bands, they do everything in it. They don't take it off at all. Sometimes they can't even get it off anymore. So that's not going to be a chatzitza, because they would do everything. They go to work with it, they clean, and so forth. There is an opinion, of course, though, that even such a ring should be removed before Netilat Yadayim. Now, let's say your hands are just dirty, but they just have dust or something on it. So personally, before I make hamotzi, I like to make sure that my hands are clean also with soap and water. So although al pi halacha, you probably don't need to wash your hands with soap and water before any time you make we have a sandwich, right? One could make a good case that you should probably ensure that your hands are clean, especially in a time of a pandemic, and especially if you're going to make hamotzi for other people on a Shabbos, and you're going to be handling the bread. I always make sure to wash with soap and water before I do the Netilat Yadayim, so that I'm handling bread with hands that are both hygienically clean and hands that are ritually clean. And we will continue with some more Netilat Yadayim at our next class. Everybody have a